And welcome everyone to the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce AGM. I feel like a rock star up here at Maxwell's on the stage. My name is Scott Gilfillan. I'm a partner at PwC and chair of the board of directors for the Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee peoples as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you'll join us in fostering a positive environment here today to ensure a safe and welcoming space for all. Notice to members having been properly given and achieving quorum of 25 members as outlined in our bylaws, this meeting is properly constituted to conduct business. One ask for any board members that are motioning or seconding motions, please use the microphone at the front of the stage so all the members can hear you. So first motion for our AGM, call for a motion to approve the 2022 annual general meeting minutes.
I would move that the minutes of the annual general meeting held September 27th, 2022 be adopted as circulated.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Everyone's got their handy voting cards, right? Opposed? Carried. Thanks again, everyone, for coming today. It's great to see so many people here in person. It seems to me, compared to last year, we have more in person, which is great to see. And I also want to welcome many of our members who are joining virtually. So thank you very much for attending. I think there's some important business, and then we'll also have some interesting insights from our speaker as well to hear. The Chamber has had a great year for the fiscal year ended 2023. Brad Dunbar is going to take us through the financial results, but in terms of the non-financial results, we've had a lot of great outcomes in terms of events and networking. For those of you that went to the gala, I know I was there. I thought it was a really well-attended, well-run event. Great to see the community coming back out for really the marquee event in the community. We've had a lot of great success thanks to our team and a lot of volunteer committees as well with a lot of the advocacy work going on, particularly in the healthcare space. Healthcare will continue to be a big area of focus for the Chamber and advocacy, along with lots of other things like Go Service and transit and things like that. I want to take this time, and we'll have a little more time later in the agenda as well, to thank all of you as our members for your contribution and involvement in the Chamber, whether it be attending an event, being part of a committee, getting involved in advocacy, anything that you do. We really appreciate it. And we'd also like to thank all of our sponsors that help make events like this and all the advocacy things we do possible. With that, I'd like to invite Brad Dunbar to the stage to report on our financial results for the year ended June 30, 2023.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm planning on spending about 2 hours going over the financials in detail. No? All right. So the main thing, we have our financials audited every year. Last year was RLB. They've been an auditor for a few years for us. Main thing is they reviewed our statements and issued a clean report. So all the financial statements should reflect fairly in all material aspects. So for our balance sheet, we still have a great cash position. Cash is down a bit. If you go through your statements, flip over to the statement of cash flows, you'll see it's just changes in working capital. So we paid off more payables, have a little bit more in receivables and prepaids at the end of the year. So no concerns on the balance sheet. The only other thing to note is that the bank loan that is due, that would be the SEBA loan, which is coming due at the end of this year. We still have an internally restricted reserve fund. That amount was set forth 2 budgets ago, where we took some of our excess and put it towards reserves for facility upgrades for the chamber building. So we still have a few things that are outstanding on that, but we're hoping to clear those up in this next year. On the statement of operations and changes in general operating fund, so our basically P&L, you'll see that we did end up with a small excess on the year. So basically a break even. We had about a $5,000 surplus on the year. Major points on this, we did see a decrease in membership fees this year, mainly due to COVID. We're still feeling the effects of that. So we had a lot of businesses that closed or merged in the year. And then we also this year stopped handing out COVID discounts to companies that were having cash flow issues. So we had a few more companies fall off our membership. That's offset by a decrease in expenditures, mainly decrease in salaries and benefits, as we did have some staff turnover during the year. And the only other real note on the statement of operations and changes in general operating fund is loss of reinstatement of debt. So that, if you look on note 7, is just the grant portion of the SEBA loan. The chamber received a notification from the CRA that we did not qualify for that grant. So we had to put that back on our P&L this year. The next few pages, like I said, the next page is just the cash flow statement. So the only thing to note on there is that we had a change in working capital funds. The next pages on the statements are just notes. So a lot of them are just general notes on accounting policies and operations, and then a little bit of a breakdown of things like accounts receivable, capital asset policies, stuff like that. The only other thing with the, I guess, with the note to the receivables are up, but a lot of it is just prepay or sponsorships that we've set up for events that are coming up. Membership receivables remain constant, and they are fairly well collected with a very small nominal amount set up as provision for doubtful accounts. Any questions? Do you want me to go through it again? No? All right.
Thanks, Brett. Could I get a motion to approve the audited financial statements of the chamber for the year ended June 30, 2023?
That's me again. On the recommendation of the Board of Directors, I move that the financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2023, as audited by the firm RLB LLP, be approved.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. I'd now like to call for a motion appointing auditors of the chamber for the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
The Board of Directors recommends that the firm of RLB LLP be appointed auditors for the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce for the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. I'd now like to call for a motion for ratification of chamber business.
I would move that resolutions, minutes, contracts, appointments, and payments, acts, and proceedings of the Board of Directors and officials of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce up to the present time be hereby ratified and approved, and said directors and officials released from all liability herewith.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. On behalf of the nominating committee, the chamber bylaws provide that the chamber be managed by a board consisting of not less than 11 and not more than 22 directors. A nominating committee appointed by the board recommended 5 candidates for the available positions on the board. The call for independent nominations for the 2023-2024 Board of Directors closed on May 12th, 2023, with no additional nominees. As such, an election is not required.
Scott Gilfillan, as part of the nominating committee, can you confirm that in accordance with our bylaws, a slate of candidates was set by the nominating committee and notice sent to the chamber voting delegates representing our member firms in good standing that an election is not required?
I so confirm.
The slate of nominees, as determined by the nominating committee, who will be joining the 2023 Board of Directors includes Mohsen Abdullah, Token Creative Services; Chris Andre, Gowling WLG; Chloe Hamilton, Warm Embrace Elder Care; Geraldine Stafford, Waterloo Region Police Services; Everton Wilmot, Wilmot Technologies, Inc.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The following individual is currently at the end of his 2-year term and will be appointed for another 2-year term. Could I have a motion for appointment of the following individual for an additional 2-year term? Brad Dunbar, Dunbar and Associates Professional Corporation.
I would move that Brad Dunbar be appointed for a 2-year term commencing the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's good, Brad. Carried. With that, I'm pleased to announce that the following individuals will form the 2023-2024 Board of Directors for the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Glenn Thorpe, Lightpath; Brad Dunbar, Dunbar and Associates Professional Corporation; Gina Hudell, Cannot; Scott Gilfillan, PwC; Joe Aminta, For All Ice Cream; Nick Hefner, Hefner Lexus and Hefner Toyota; Shelley Forwell, Walter Fady; Carlene Carroll, Wilfrid Laurier University; Ron Gagnon, Grand River Hospital; Mariam Rasool, Stelco; Roberto Villamar, Cohico; Mohsen Abdullah, Token Creative Services; Chris Andre, Gowling WLG; Chloe Hamilton, Warm Embrace Elder Care; Geraldine Stafford, Waterloo Region Police Services; Everton Wilmot, Wilmot Technologies, Inc. This is your Board of Directors for 2023. May I ask the members of the board to come forward and be recognized? Board, can I actually get you guys up here?
All
right. And we're blessed with the presence of former Mayor Emeritus Dave Jaworski. So I'd like to welcome Mayor Dave Jaworski to the stage for the official induction of the board.
Now, what a pleasant surprise for me here today. It says some words here, but I don't have my glasses, so I'll just, I want to say thank you to certainly all the board. Oh, will this work? Thank you to all the chamber board staff. They're the ones who make things happen, and so proud of all of them of helping out for all these years. So since I'm up here on my own, I want to thank the chamber staff, even Ian McLean. Thank you, Scott. I'm pleased to be here with you today and to all to recognize this group of individuals. I ask that the board of directors stand while I read the oath. Once I'm finished reading the entire oath, I ask that you all respond to the oath with "I do," much like a wedding. I swear that I will faithfully and truly perform my duty as a board member of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce, that I will, in all matters connected with the discharge of such duty, do all things as I shall truly and conscientiously believe to be adapted to promote the objects for which the said chamber was constituted, according to the true intent and meaning of the same. So help me God. Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, Mayor Dave, and thank you, board members. The Chamber would not be able to support our members without the continued backing from our corporate partners. We list them in the annual report, but I'd also like to thank them directly. So our Chamber chairs, circle sponsors, our BDO, BMO Bank of Montreal, Conestoga Meat Packers, Cowan Insurance Group, Enbridge, Equitable Life of Canada, GHD, Google, Gowling WLG, Hefner Lexus and Hefner Toyota, Home Hardware Stores Limited, the Immigration Partnership, KPMG, Manulife, MCAP, McCarter Grespin Lawyers, MNP LLP, Sun Life, and the University of Waterloo. Our Chamber patron sponsors are BDC, Bell Canada, EY, PwC, Miller Thompson, and TD. Our title sponsors, Libero Credit Union Business After 5 Series, MCAP Chamber Young Professional Series, MNP Speed Networking Series, the Hefner Lexus and Hefner Toyota Women's Leadership Series, Manulife Behind the Business podcast. And our Chamber trustee sponsors are Activa, MTE, SG Cunningham, Walter Fady, Waterloo EDC, and Wilfrid Laurier University. And our media partners, City News 570, 96.7 Chime FM, Country 106.7, and CTV. Thank you very much to all our sponsors. I'd also like to call out our Chamber Healthcare Initiative sponsors for continued support of our healthcare initiatives. Those sponsors are crucial to the success of our annual Family Medicine Resident Weekend, which is going into its 21st year. And the event's really been instrumental in residents' decisions to establish family practices in region, which benefits all of us as citizens and business people of the region. I'd also like to take a minute to thank all the volunteers who have dedicated their time to Chamber programs over the past year, whether that's assisting with event preparation, planning and execution, or assisting with advocacy or healthcare initiatives. We're very thankful for your commitment to the Chamber. I would also like to recognize a volunteer who fulfilled a 2-year term this past year as a committee chair. So thanks to Mackenzie Ainlay, Chamber Young Professionals Chair, who I don't think is here today, but thanks Mackenzie for your support and commitment. We also have a number of board members who are retiring at completion of their terms. So I'd like to thank them as well. Many of them have completed full 6-year terms. And in particular, Adam Smith, who is finishing this year as past chair, has been with the Chamber for more than 6 years and completed a role as chair for 2 years and past chair for 1 year. So I'd like to call out and thank Adam Smith, Sean Sullivan, Chris Ronan, Wendy Campbell, Rick Jakes, and Jody Armit. Thanks to all those for their support. We are now going to hold a short meeting of the Board of Directors, now that we've got our newly constituted board, to appoint the Executive Committee for 2023 to 2024. I'd like to call the Executive Committee, I call the board meeting to order. In accordance with our bylaws, the Board of Directors recommend the appointment of the members of the Executive Committee for a 1-year term. I'd like to call for a motion to appoint our Executive Committee.
I move that the appointed officers for a 1-year term on the 2023-2024 Executive Committee be Scott Gilfillan, Chair, Gina Hodel, Vice Chair, Ron Gagnon, Vice Chair, Brad Dunbar, Treasurer, Mohsen Abdullah, Secretary.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Can I get a motion to adjourn the board meeting we just had?
I would move that all business has been conducted. The board meeting is adjourned.
I second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That is officially the shortest board meeting of the year, every year. If there is no further business to attend to, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn the annual general meeting.
I would move that all business having been conducted, the annual general meeting is adjourned.
And I'll second the motion.
Thank you both, and I don't think we need a vote on that one. So just want to say thanks again. Great to see everybody here. Thanks to all the members for your engagement and involvement in the chamber. Thanks to my board for helping us achieve everything that we are going to achieve in the next year. And I'd also like to take this time to introduce our guest speaker. So actually, before I do that, I'd also like to announce, shout out for the gala. We will now be accepting nominations for the 2023 Business Excellence Awards Gala. It's going to be held Thursday, March 21st, 2024. Make sure you guys get that in your calendars ASAP. To nominate a local business, please visit beagala.ca. Nominations are going to be open until Friday, November 17th. Always a great event. Always great to recognize all the great businesses and organizations in our community. So certainly encourage you to nominate and definitely plan to be at the gala. We're also thrilled to have Scotiabank as our speaker sponsor today and appreciate their ongoing support. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce James Daneman, District Vice President, Waterloo Region District with Scotiabank, to introduce today's speaker. Please join me in welcoming James.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Scotiabank is proud to be a long-standing member and contributing partner in the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce. Like you, we are focused on growth and will continue to find opportunities to invest in our great community. From our post-secondary investments to supporting our local businesses and providing best-in-class advice for our clients, we are committed to Waterloo Region. A more recent example is through our partnership with the Chamber and recognizing local women-led businesses with the Female Founders Program. Through that, we are providing access to our Scotiabank Women Initiative. The Scotiabank Women Initiative is a bank-wide signature program for our clients who identify as women or non-binary. It is designed to increase their economic and professional opportunities to be successful both now and in the future. Whether supporting women to take their careers and businesses further, collaborating with inclusion-focused leaders and companies, providing women-owned and women-led businesses with equitable access to funding, or helping women take charge of their finances, the SWI, or Scotiabank Women Initiative, breaks down barriers to empower women to succeed on their own terms. I now have the distinct pleasure of introducing today's speaker. I think you remember 2 years ago, JF joined us as well virtually, so it's great to have him here in person, so thank you, JF. JF Perrault, Jean-Francois Perrault, joined Scotiabank December 31st, 2015 as a Senior Vice President and Chief Economist. He leads a team of economists to support Scotiabank's domestic and international business lines and clients from retail to capital markets, providing Scotiabank senior executives, business lines, and customers with perspectives, insights, and forecasts on economic, financial market, and policy developments. Prior to joining Scotiabank, JF held prominent roles with the federal government, the Bank of Canada, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and his educational background includes the master's and bachelor's degree in economics with the University of Ottawa. We're absolutely thrilled to have JF here once again. The timing could not be better, let's be honest. Good time to have you here, JF. And not only is he here this afternoon, but this morning, I just want to shout out to JF for joining us at the University of Waterloo. We were in front of some Scotiabank scholarship recipients, some Schulich scholars, U of W faculty and staff, great presentation with them, great investment in our community. So JF, thank you very much. Moderating the fireside chat today is Ian McLean, President and CEO of the Greater Kitabi Chamber. So please join me in welcoming Ian and JF.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I do want to shout out to Mayor Dave. I think he came here just to have a drink and listen in, but we pressed him into service. Mayor McCabe was detained and wanted to be here. So thank you, Dave, for pitching in. And thank you, James, and for Scotiabank's continued support. Your presence and support today and on many other occasions is gratefully appreciated. It's great to have you here in person, JF. The last time we had a similar chat, it was virtual, right in the middle of COVID. So thank you for being here in the region of Waterloo. I do feel like a rock star, much like Scott said, but mostly because every time I see you, you're appearing on national TV. So I'm thinking we may have to get some of this to the national TV stations. I wanted to maybe let's start with inflation. It's topical. It's persistent inflation is impacting both consumers and businesses, and a lot of the narrative is that persistence. When you check under the hood, a big chunk of that is actually rising inflation or interest rates itself. So should the Bank of Canada interest rates be increased, or what do you think their next step should be as interest rate or inflation is persistently high at about 4%?
That's a great question, and it's hard not to feel like a rock star when you're sitting on a stage and you've got all these lights that and this cool black room. But yeah, to the interesting question. So listen, there's no question that higher interest rates are causing higher inflation. That's a documented fact. Mortgage interest costs go into the inflation measure, so the higher interest rates are, the higher inflation is, for sure. But that's been an important driver of headline inflation. There's no question about it. And that's always been the case, and it's the case in many countries. You know, interest costs are an important consideration, are an important element of a consumer basket, right? We all pay interest in some form, and so CPI measures that to some extent. What matters for the Bank of Canada, though, is so they look through that. So they'll take measures of mortgage interest costs out of the equation in some sense, and they'll look for things that are more kind of symptomatic of what inflationary pressures are absent their action. So for that, they'll look at, and they've got two measures of core inflation that kind of strip some of these things out. It's technical. One is median inflation, one's trimmed inflation. So those are core measures of inflation that strip out the most volatile elements of inflation. So stuff that moves up the most and stuff that moves down the most. To get a sense of what kind of, like, what's the momentum? What's the underlying dynamic on inflation? And those measures of inflation, unfortunately, remain pretty elevated. We got an inflation print yesterday. I'm all confused because I've been on the road yesterday. Which, you know, showed, unfortunately, a pretty significant acceleration in these underlying measures of inflation, these kind of core trend measures of inflation.
Gas and
no, so not even so that so
that's
gas is taken out because that's moving up too much, right? So this is, and it changes month to month. So they filter out the stuff and gas, of course, is up a lot. You know, vegetables and food are up a lot, so they filter a lot of that stuff out. So this is, you know, and there are hundreds of categories of goods. So this is really kind of a broad indication that inflation, you know, is not going in the right direction. Then it probably means that Bank of Canada has got a little bit more work to do, which is unfortunate. There's a Bank of Canada decision 2 weeks ago where at that time, they didn't have the fortune of having yesterday's inflation report. They had the one for the month before that, which had still indicated some degree of problem. So on inflation, say the last 3-4 months, you've had these core measures of inflation that were in the 3.5% to 4% range, kind of stuck there. And the bank head in their decision said, we know this is a problem, but we're seeing signs that our actions are actually starting to impact growth. Growth is weakening, and that's a good thing because they've been trying to make that happen for a while, and it looks like it's happening. So the governor looked at that and said, listen, growth is slowing. It's good. Inflation, sticking in there. I'm really worried about it, but I'm going to keep rates where they are unless I have more reason to worry about inflation. And he just got more reason to worry about inflation yesterday.
One of the things I think in one of the charts I saw on the news was actually Canada's kind of towards the bottom at 4%. There's other economies that are their I guess their inflation rate, whether it's the headline inflation, is much higher.
Yeah.
Some of them are up still towards 7%. So we're a trading nation. We still rely on that. So the global nature of this, how does Canada play into the global context?
So, inflation was over 8% a year ago, and it's about 4% now, so these headline measures. So it's come down a lot. And that really has got nothing to do with what's going on here. That's, international oil prices, food prices, some other things that are much more a function of what's happening outside our border than what's happening within our border. Inflation has come down globally because, generally speaking, the global economy softened a little bit. But you're right, we are kind of at the lower end of the inflation outcomes of a range of advanced countries where we're not, though, comparing favorably against the US, where inflation there has fallen more rapidly than it has here. So what's a little bit of a surprise, again, about yesterday's inflation data and the stickiness of core measures of inflation here is, why isn't it falling here when it's falling in the US? Because a lot of the stuff that we buy is the same things the American buy, or we import a lot of stuff from the Americans. So if prices are slowing down there, you'd think that they would slow a little bit here, and it's not happening yet. And that's a mystery. Nobody knows why that is yet.
And I go off script. I told you I was going to do this. The UAW strike, and I mean the auto sector is so important to Canada locally here. Many companies and supply chains. Obviously, we have Toyota, but it's a huge factor in the North American economy. What's the potential impact? I mean, does it really depend on how long there's upset in the negotiations with the UAW?
Yeah, so there's a couple of dimensions to that. One is obviously what happens with the UAW negotiations in the US, and the other is what's going on with Unifor here. And yes, they got to deal with Ford today, so that's good news. But I mean, the auto industry is incredibly integrated, right? So if the Americans go on strike for any length of time, that unquestionably impacts us. So as we think about, and unfortunately, what's going on the strike side in the US is just, the latest in a series of, pretty spectacular events over the last couple of months, 3 months, that just muddy the economic picture, right? So you've had wildfires in May and June and July and August, and Yellowknife was, evicted for a few weeks. You had flooding, wildfires and flood in the same place. You've had a port strike in Vancouver, which has really impacted supply chains actually across much of the country. And that's just kind of muddying the water tremendously. So in terms of like looking at what's going on economically and getting a really strong signal these days, it's tough because you've got these things that are very, very, very difficult to kind of quantify in terms of economic impact. The strike is easier, right? You look at, okay, how many days is like an automaker shut down? You kind of multiply that by something and give you a sense. But that's just kind of the cherry on the sundae of like the weird stuff that's been going on that makes it very difficult to get a good real-time beat on the economy.
So locally, I mean, I think we're seeing evidence. I mean, there's reports that consumers are appearing to be more hesitant to spend, and I think that's a function of you renew your mortgage and it suddenly goes up. At every point, it could mean hundreds or if not thousands of dollars. So people are trimming their sales on their personal spending. What measures? I mean, I guess the question is there a measure that will incent that continued spending because that's really driving the economy, or are those, we talked just before, they're like half measures. Like if you just say we're artificially going to lower grocery rates on certain goods, is there anything that can actually be done to incent consumer spending? Because that would be, I think that would be, everyone would agree, if that really slows down, that's when we have a big problem and potential for the R word.
Yeah, so you've got two kind of competing impacts going on in the household spending world. and you experience that here as well. Firstly, like the Bank has been raising rates and inflation is high, and they're raising rates because they want people to spend less on stuff, right? So the fact that that's happening, as difficult as it is for businesses, like the Bank Canada's perspective, that's good news, right? So when the governor a couple of weeks ago made his decision, he basically said, listen, the economy is weakening and that's good news. That's just the reality of the situation. We're in a world where good news is bad news and bad news is good news when you're trying to control inflation. So the fact that it's happening, and we're seeing this across the country as well, right? I mean, we look at consumer spending in our books, like it's clear people are having a little bit of a hard time, and so you're seeing spending cut back. That's kind of a consequence of what we're doing on the rate side. The other dimension to that is you're seeing record increases in population growth, right? The number of folks coming into the country, coming into the region is at record highs, right? If you look at StatsCan data, so as of the second quarter of this year, relative to the second quarter of the year before, we've got over 1 million more people in the country. And that pace of population has actually been accelerating through the summer. And these are people that buy stuff, right? And they're workers, they're households, they're consumers, they need housing, they need all kinds of things. And actually, so one of the consequences of that is despite this rate increase that we've seen, 500 basis points of tightening in the year, that's a little more in a year, like that's crazy strong. Despite that, what's happened in Canada in general, and I would argue here as well, is that consumption has been stronger than we would have anticipated. In part because you've just got way more people coming into a place, and those people are buying stuff.
One thing, and my colleague Greg DeRocher and I, we talk about this on our radio show often, is, you know, inflation starts and it really accelerates and is getting out of control. Interest rates traditionally has been the way to turn down. Is that the only tool? Because it would appear that that really is, as far as monetary policy. Is there anything else that can be done that isn't so, because it is so harmful both to consumers and to business? Is there any other tools that should be looked at? And I think you're starting to see this politically as people saying, geez, interest rates, is that really the only thing that we have to help address the issue?
Yeah, so this is where things get a little bit rich from a political perspective. So you had, for instance, Premier Ford write to the governor of the Bank of Canada a few weeks ago saying, listen, this is really starting to hurt, you should stop. And of course they stopped, and he was happy about that. Had nothing to do with him writing the letter. But the reality is that policy in Canada has typically frustrating the Bank of Canada's efforts. So you've had in Ontario, you've had in almost every single province, governments over last year, not so much recently, but say you go back last fall, you know, understanding that their population is hurting, you know, giving checks to people, typically at the lower end of the income side, saying, listen, we know grocery prices are high. We know inflation is a problem. We know you're paying more for interest costs. So here's $500. Here's $1,000. Here's $600. Depends on the province, but it was, you know, in that range. And what that did, unfortunately, is while it helped people manage the cost impacts of what's been going on, it's forced the Bank of Canada to do more, right? So we think that of all the stuff that's been done across the country over the last year, rates are 50 to 70 basis points higher than they otherwise would be because governments have been trying to help people on the inflation side. That's one thing. So there isn't anything I think you can do on the fiscal policy side to help with that, because the more you're trying to insulate people from the effects of what the bank is trying to do, the more it complicates things. You know, stuff like hauling in the grocers and, you know, getting them to stop raising prices or flatten prices. I mean, that's a political theater. I mean, you know, if you look at kind of margins in grocery stores as an indication of whether or not they've been kind of, you know, taking advantage of the situation, they've been pretty stable. What's been going on is margins have been stable, costs have increased a lot because the cost of food has increased a lot. It looks like they're making tons and tons of money because they're applying the same margin on a much higher cost base. But really the challenge is the cost base. So how do you fix that? And that's, you know, that's international stuff. That's, you know, domestic production, that's supply management, that's all kinds of stuff. It's higher wages. At the end of the day, the grocers don't have a whole lot of control over. So that's not really a solution. And the ultimate solution is productivity. right? So can we make ourselves more productive? Can we produce more stuff with less work, basically? And we call that raising potential output. And that's a problem that's been a huge issue in Canada. Productivity in Canada has been declining for 6 quarters now. Productivity levels in Canada now are where they were in 2016. So it's been a big problem, but it's not something you can fix overnight. So that's not a short-term solution either.
And the solution to productivity is investment in technology and
100%.
new machinery, and those are long-term. That's not going to happen.
You can't turn that around in 6 months. No way. No way.
Well, it still needs to be addressed, but it doesn't address this short-term.
100%.
Yeah.
Number one public policy problem from my
So
perspective.
let's move on to everyone's favorite topic, housing. Here in Waterloo region, we've seen right through the COVID, we had the huge spike in house prices. They've started to come back down, and it seems like there's a lot more peaks and valleys in terms of price of housing. Maybe put Waterloo region's housing situation in context of sort of the national picture, where current prices and how do interest rates affect that, and then we'll talk about some of the other pieces. That housing is not an issue unto itself. There are other pieces that if you're building more housing, you better have more of a lot of other stuff like healthcare. But let's start with housing and the context that we find ourselves in.
So, I mean, the housing market is still pretty dynamic. I mean, it doesn't feel like it because it's not as hot as it was a couple of years ago, a year ago, even as hot as it was in some early parts of the year. But the reality is that there has been, and there continues to be, a huge mismatch between supply and demand. And that's true across the country. It's particularly true in the GTA, but it's true across the country. And that means that you're seeing a tremendous amount of dynamism in a broad range of real estate markets across the country, including here. And by dynamism, I simply mean, folks essentially moving to parts of the country where prices are lower than where they're from. So you certainly saw this, a lot of this in the pandemic. Our view, though, is that this imbalance between supply, so the number of units we've been building, and population increase, which is a record levels, that's like here to stay. We're not building enough. So as a result of that, the pressures that we're seeing across the country on the affordability side, they're not going to go away. So, prices here are lower, like, well, I don't know, average price of 800,000 or so on one place, obviously lower in Toronto. I don't see much scope for that to come down in a meaningful way in the future. In fact, I'd argue that what we're likely to see here and elsewhere in the country is just a continued upward push on prices. Not 20, 30, 40% a year as we saw once in a while, but the supply demand issue speaks for itself.
Is that even in the face of, I mean, we're seeing the province has a goal of, 1.5 million homes, and you've got the demand side. There's clearly the demand. The supply is going to be hard to increase to hit those levels. I mean, for any number of reasons. We don't have the skilled labor. We don't have the supply chains. We actually don't have the capacity. It's hard to see how that's going to happen in the short term, but we're working towards it. But in addition to that, for every house that you build and someone new that's here in a community, you need healthcare, you need hospital, you need family physicians, you need clinicians, you need, immigration services, as we're a huge destination for immigration. How do you kind of square those things? Because it seems to me, and we've had this conversation at the board and amongst the business community, of saying housing isn't its own thing. There's a variety of things that have to be wrapped around for it to be successful. Keep it attainable, have accessibility in housing. How do you kind of square those issues?
So this is a really tricky political issue. Housing, as you said, is kind of reflective of a broader issue. The housing issue has been ongoing for a while. Originally it was, and still to this day, it's, kind of NIMBYism, right? People don't want more places in their neighborhood. They don't want more folks on the street. They don't want a 2-story apartment block next to their building. So that's frustrated the supply response for a number of years. Irrespective of the population increase, that's just been a challenge. The population dimension makes things from a government perspective even more challenging because, as you point out, we've thought of, okay, it's fantastic to have all these people come into the country. We need the workers. It's making us younger.
And I think that, to be clear, we need them. There was the economy.
So there's no question about that. But it requires a tremendous amount of planning to ensure that as these people come into the country, we benefit from it as much as possible. So that's to say, you know, to your point about hospitals, I think Ontario's got, I think it's got like 2.7 hospital beds per 1,000 people or something like that. And which is not a lot, right? I mean, nobody I think in this room would say, oh, we got just the right amount of hospital beds. Like we're waiting for hospital services here and everywhere else in the country. Well, you know, Ontario's taking in right now 500,000 people a year. So you want to keep that level at 2.7, which is not, you know, not the North Star. You're talking like you need like 1,000 hospital beds a year to be built. Nobody is doing that. And that's not just like an indictment of the region or the province, like every province is like that. Same thing on education, same thing on all kinds of stuff. So, you know, coming with the population increase that we're experiencing needs to be, unfortunately or not, depending on your perspective, you know, a significant ramping up of the infrastructure and services that we need as people to have good lives. I mean, just think of it in an extremely idealistic way. We had 1.2 million more people in Canada in the second quarter of this year. So think of, which is a large city, right? That's like much more people than like double Kitchener-Waterloo. 1 year. So think of, we're going to put a city of 1.2 million people in the middle of nowhere, and the amount of things that you would need for those people to be comfortable. Now, obviously, it's different if you're tacking onto a city, but you know, think of the hospitals, think of the schools, think of the transit, like think of all those things. And that's not, we're not planning for that. We're not executing on that.
So one of the things that comes with that growth, and this is, and we're going to talk about it a little later, but we'll talk about it now, is infrastructure and the need for continued investment in, whether it's, we're talking about a new hospital here, we need a new hospital here, we need LRT phase 2 if we're going to have people living right across the region, we need to get it to South Cambridge, we need all day two-way go. I mean, and every other community has similar needs, let alone in, you know, whether it's like accessible housing or public, you know, those sorts of things. So there's huge needs, and it's the same everywhere. We're also getting to a point where the federal government is saying that they're wanting to look for $15 billion a year in savings. You know, rightfully, I think there's lots of people saying, look, we got to try and rein that back. How do you square that when you say, look, we got to keep investing in social infrastructure, in critical public infrastructure, transportation, transit, housing, you know, hospitals. How do you square that circle? Because you can't stop investing in that when you're bringing that many people in. I mean, so what would your recommendation be around the right level of and the type of money that you're spending, and as opposed to on operations versus infrastructure that serves moving forward? Because you still need to have doctors and nurses to operate a hospital, but you better build these things, as an example, if you're going to have that many people coming in.
Yeah. And I almost can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Like, given our objectives on the population side and the results on the population side, like, you basically need bigger government. You need governments to step up and say, we're making a historic investment in population. We got to match that with historic investments in capital to ensure that those folks and the folks that are already here benefit from all this to the extent that's possible. You think, I mean, just think of it as like you're a company, and you all of a sudden you decide to double the amount of staff that you've got. Well, if you don't increase the size of your building, if you don't increase the number of computers you've got, if you don't increase your capital side, like, you're not, those people aren't going to be used effectively. And, you know, it's going to come at the detriment of stuff. And so the same thing on the government side. So unfortunately, probably means we should be spending a lot more on infrastructure, a lot more on the healthcare stuff, a lot more. And the flip side of that is maybe you need to raise taxes in the short run to pay for that. Nobody wants to pay more taxes. I don't want to pay more taxes. But at the same time, like, there are needs that flow from these decisions, which ultimately are in the best interest of the country, that need to be funded somewhere. It's not like you want the government to run a $200 billion deficit forever, because that's just not sustainable. That's not sustainable.
Okay, so I want to come back to, you know, we all know most businesses are small businesses. They're the ones that that drive communities and the economy broadly. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and we've been working very closely with Cambridge Chamber locally around the importance, and we've been saying this for about 3 years. The CEBA loans they were very important in keeping many businesses solvent, or at least the opportunity to stay open during COVID. They were huge, and it was welcome, and it was kudos to the government for listening to business and having those. But the repayment schedule was always too accelerated, particularly when as we started to open up and realize it wasn't, you didn't go from the standing start to 100 kilometers an hour in one fell swoop. It has been a very, herky jerky. It has gone up and down. So I guess the question is, for those businesses that use that kept them alive, what's your view of the announcement that was made the other day, which frankly was a bit of a joke from the federal government, made it for many small businesses that are here, saying that they had another year to repay to keep that maybe like 18 days, which is ridiculous. So we're pushing hard to make sure that that's going to be in the economic update, saying the government should extend that for a full year so people can continue, those businesses can continue to stabilize and get back to growth. What's your view on that program and what they need to be doing to make sure that they're not going to force people to make a choice of saying, I can't afford to fully pay that back, and if I can't, that debt level just takes me over the edge and I'm just going to close down?
Well, when you set it up that way, like, what do you expect me to say?
Well, I'm hoping you're not going to argue with it.
So this is something I actually raised with Minister Freeland a couple of years ago now, saying, listen, you need to rethink the repayment schedules because, we're looking at what's going on and we're looking at our clients and there's going to be a problem at some point. And at that time, she said nobody had ever talked about that with her. So she was like, wow, no. And of course, that's been an issue. So we've advocated for this for quite a while, including pretty actively over the last 6 or 7 months, because it was clear the government was thinking about doing something. And our sense was, well, the thing you've got to do is to extend by 1 year the forgiveness window, right? Of course, that's not what they did. I don't know why, but I'm going to be gracious and give them the benefit of the doubt and hear me out. There are a lot of businesses that paid everything back, right? There are a lot of businesses that said, okay, this is the timeline, I'm going to do it, and they've done it, so they sacrificed to make that happen. Maybe they thought that by extending it by a year, you were kind of, snubbing those that did whatever they did to repay things on time and benefit from that, maybe. Now, I think, with the pushback they're getting, it actually makes it easier for them to go back, maybe in the fall update or in the next budget, say, listen, we've listened very clearly. People want us to extend this, despite the fact that there's this, quote unquote injustice done to those who pay things off earlier. So I'm kind of hopeful that this, brouhaha, these pretty powerful statements made by Dan Kelly and others will be enough to say, actually, okay, we got the cover we need, we're going to do it, and we feel comfortable about the fact that some will be repaid earlier and benefited, and some will be repaying later. That's all fine.
I think one of the things, and I appreciate that some of us have been saying that to the finance minister and others, as you say, for over a year, 2-3 years, saying it needed to be extended. But I think COVID didn't attack businesses all in the same way, and some actually did really well during COVID because if you were an essential service, etc. But who really was hurt was services businesses. I mean, hospitality, tourism, restaurants, and they're the ones that are still not up to that. They're not fully back yet, and that's the challenge. So I'm hopeful that the interventions of folks like yourself saying, because it could have a real impact in terms of saying, interest rates and inflation, and we want to dampen the economy. You want to see dampening in the economy. You see tens of thousands of businesses going out of business. That's not something that I think is helpful right now. Yeah. Listen, as we think, manufacturing is still the number one, business sector here in Waterloo region when you put, whether it's food processing, the auto sector, etc. And the Ontario government is providing pretty optimistic projections around the provincial manufacturing sector. They've made some investments to their credit. Do you expect that manufacturing will generate high levels of productivity and employment in future years, given that productivity is a challenge? But in that sector, you talk about new battery plants, you're going to have brand new investments. Is that part of not just auto, but in the advanced manufacturing that we're seeing? Is it going to start to drive that productivity gains that we're going to need as a country, and certainly in Ontario?
I think so. That being said, I mean, that being said, like any government that's going to spend like billions and billions of dollars on something is going to exaggerate the impacts. So, you can't take, and like what government knows exactly, I'm investing this and it's going to create 8,940 jobs. Like you can't, nobody's that precise. But I mean, clearly these are major, major investments that are being done. They are going to have very significant impacts. No question about it. I think, so that's one reason to be optimistic. Another reason to be optimistic is look what the Americans are doing. So the Americans are spending like, the federal government in the US spend like crazy supporting firms in the green transition.
And is that the Inflation Reduction
The
Act?
Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
So there's the Inflation Reduction Act, and there's the CHIPS Act, which
Yeah.
is a semiconductor support act. And we're starting to see payoffs. So one of the reasons we're spending billions and billions and billions in subsidies is because if we don't do it, the Americans are offering it. So it's like, you want the plant, you're gonna have to pay. Well, obviously we can't compete with the Americans on the scale that they're going to, but what you're seeing already in the US, for instance, is the construction spending on manufacturing facilities up to June of this year is 80% higher than it was relative to a year ago. Right? So it's increasing at a tremendous pace. And we're still in early days of kind of that stuff. If the American manufacturing system grows, like there's no way ours doesn't grow. There's no way the Mexican doesn't grow. So we're going to ride on what the Americans are doing one way or another. We've got our own program that's kind of will turbocharge that effort, I would think. And then you've got the broader kind of green transition, which we're a mineral powerhouse. Is going to benefit the mineral side of our economy, almost certainly. But it's going to lead to a tremendous amount of government investments in the disruptive, innovative technologies that still don't exist that are going to help us effectuate that transition, right? So I would expect, over the next few years, a lot of activity in that front. And of course, that's going to be concentrated in parts of the country where there is the innovative and creative and technical know-how to drive some of that stuff forward, which, a lot of that is here, to be honest.
I was interviewing Michael Renchek, who's the president of Bruce Power, for my podcast, and we had a really interesting conversation around, especially MNRs or SMRs, small modular reactors. Is that one of those? Because that obviously leads to the greening of the rest of the greening of the Canadian energy space and electricity space. But is that one of those things? It's Canadian technology where it seems to be developed here. Is that one of those places where, in terms of the industrial and manufacturing space here, this is off script, so if you don't have an answer, I told you I was going to do this, but it just happened to talk to him a couple of days ago. But he says there's a real opportunity for Canada to lead, because everyone globally, if we're going to hit global targets for greenhouse gas reductions and in the climate crisis, that Canada can play a role in that because of our expertise in that.
There's no question, right? I mean, the challenge on the nuclear side has never been, there's the modular, getting those small reactors, which is of course a huge technical challenge, but it's just been, the barrier historically has been more, people are afraid of nuclear rather than, kind of the green benefits of nuclear, which is obviously extremely low carbon footprint, with the worry that, well, these things can blow up and then you lose like a city or a province or whatever, which never happens, but that's the fear. I think that's changing almost everywhere except for Germany. Germany's weird about these things.
That's odd.
Because it's part of the suite of innovative products that will transform how we supply ourselves with energy. I'm convinced. The sooner these things come around, the better, and there'll be widespread adoption. Like you don't have to worry about that, because it's just the need for clean energy, given the fact that governments have mandated that this is going to happen by such and such a date across the world, different dates here and there, but everybody's committed to basically net zero at some point. then you've got to look at these options incredibly seriously. And we have the beginnings of a huge competitive advantage in that space.
Okay, the Ontario and federal governments over the past 3 years have been implementing programs to assist business with retaining and recruiting, frankly, talent. There's a whole variety of programs. What are the ones in your mind that have been successful and have the most promise to be successful? Or are there other measures that we should be doing? Because I mean, this is one of the top 3 things we've heard about. Even yes, of cost of goods, interest rates, those are obviously, but talent is one of those things we hear about time that people can't get the expertise they need for their business. And that's not in any one sector. That could be the shop floor in manufacturing. It could be, IT, right across the board, finance, everything. People are looking for good people. So what are the programs, and it doesn't necessarily have to be government, but what are the things that we're doing right now that seem to be working, or what should we be doing? Because business just needs solutions, whether it's government or otherwise, to make sure we have the talent to drive the economy.
No, that's a great question. And I don't know that any one program in particular works better than others. You've got like the accelerated express entry, you've got temporary foreign worker program for low steel workers. I think what's really transformational about what we've done on that is just made it very, very clear that Canada's open for business on the immigration front. So it is reasonably easy to source foreign labor in Canada relative to other parts of the world. In part because business pressure has been intense to make this happen. Now, there are huge issues, right? There's like roughly kind of a 2 million backlog of applications that are being processed. So that's an issue. But you've got just an incredibly receptive federal government in terms of finding ideas or implementing ideas that businesses think are going to work. I don't personally have any. If you have any, like they guaranteed they're going to listen, because we are in a world where, I mean, just to come back to the job vacancy issue, we've been raising rates for a long time, hoping for a slowdown. Might or might not happen at current levels of interest rates. But the one thing throughout the last 2 years, despite people paying more for rates and inflation being high, if you poll businesses, up until most recent surveys, number one concern is still job vacancies.
Mm-hmm.
And then in fact, I was just looking at data before coming here. It surprised me. We got data on job vacancies yesterday for the second quarter of the year. So we had a peak of 1 million job vacancies about a year ago. Firms have been hiring like crazy. A lot of that is foreign labor, which is fantastic. Job vacancies started to come down to roughly 700,000 or so, 750,000 in the first quarter of this year. And they popped back up to 80,000 second quarter, right? So the challenge on the job side, on the vacancy side, is not going away.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's getting worse at a time when the government's been trying to slow things down. So it just speaks to the immensity of the challenge. And the opportunities that are there. So I'm afraid I can't give you like a specific thing that, this is a program that's knocking it out of the park. I would say the one I think that's been the most confrontational and hopefully the most effective in time we'll see is this program that's been launched in the US. It's basically saying, and it's in the tech sector, say like if you're a tech worker, you want to come to Canada, we'll make it happen in record time.
Mm-hmm.
So going after labor in the US at a time when there had been a lot of tech layoffs in the US. Those are kind of smart interventions, but that's,
And that's making a difference here. We hear from our friends at Communitech
sure.
that's actually having reshoring some of that talent, especially Canadian talent. Now, if we need to, we can block out this answer because for other parts of the country, because I'm going to ask you, what part of Canada, which province, in which region, but which province or region of Canada is going to lead economic growth in the fourth quarter? Like, where is the strengthening come out of the Canadian economy? And if it's not Ontario, we will black it out for.
Okay, so black it out. So it's a little bit of a tricky question because, going back to some of the stuff I said about wildfires and strikes and all those things, those have affected the western part of our country much more than us. So as you think about the very short run, say the fourth quarter or third quarter, like economic activity will rebound because things are
Yeah.
normalizing. So everybody's going back to Yellowknife. So all Yellowknife is going to be, active again. So like the fourth quarter, it's almost certainly going to be Alberta or BC, one of those provinces. I think the more interesting question is, as you look into 2024, who's more likely to stand out? And there, again, not Ontario, largely because we're experiencing, at the detriment of Ontario, a very, very significant increase in global oil prices. Right, they're up like $25 in the last couple of months. It's very, very difficult for Alberta and Saskatchewan not to do well in that environment. So they're probably going to lead.
The oil and gas is going to actually lead in 2024.
Yeah,
Like,
well, the increase in prices that we've seen is
Yeah.
going to generate significant economic benefits for those provinces, for
Mhm.
sure. Now, Ontario is a little bit of a different story. We're going to pay more for gas and oil and gas. To Albertans.
Yep.
Simplistically, but so I would say those are the parts of the country that we think are going to do the best. And Ontario, unfortunately, being a very significant importer of oil, if you want to think of it that way, just as Quebec, is probably going to not do as well as a result of that.
Okay, we will block that. And then it's okay, JF, you're
But
welcome,
it's a special.
you're welcome to
it's-
come back even when you bring
international oil
bad news
stuff.
for Ontario.
It's nobody's fault.
Okay, one of the things that we're starting to see, and this is, I think it's as much, it just is topical, it's in the news. The gap between private sector salaries and the public sector. So maybe you want to comment on that. I mean, we are seeing, and you talked about the increasing, especially through COVID, of if there was job growth, it was in the public sector. The investments in infrastructure, so there is some pressure on the public sector for that expertise. But there's a growing it seems like there's a growing narrative and concern around the gap between the private and public sector, particularly because of the challenges around our talent needs and who's able to get talent. What are your observations as you see that? Because it's a real thing. It's not imagined. People are seeing it, and it's a real phenomenon.
Yeah, so I would approach that from two dimensions. So one is, governments have been hiring a lot, municipal, federal, provincial, over the last 2 years. And of course, if they're hiring a lot, then that's coming from the same pool of labor that we're all hiring from. So that creates additional pressures, additional challenges from a private sector perspective. Now, has there been excessive hiring in the public sector? Like maybe, but if you think of kind of service delivery in government, I don't think anybody in here would say, well, it's been fantastically strong. So is that because they don't have enough workers? Is that because they're doing things improperly? Whatever. So that's one thing. The other is, it is true that there are blocks of public servants. This is more at the federal level than at the municipal or provincial level, that make more than folks in the private sector. And that's more so at the lower end of the income stream. So, basically, if you're in a job that pays $30, $35 an hour, almost certainly that same job is going to pay a lot more government with a pension and benefits and working from home in some cases and all this kind of stuff.
And that does impact smaller businesses
100%.
disproportionately.
100%. When you get into kind of the more professional fields, then it starts to change, where government sectors, in fact, aren't all that competitive. Salaries aren't all that competitive with private sector salaries. But there is, that's that $30 to $35 an hour and lower. That's a lot of people, and that creates pretty significant distortions. Very significant distortions, especially when to the point of earlier, like there are hundreds of thousands of vacancies in, quote unquote, lower paying jobs in the, $30 an hour and below, like hundreds of thousands of vacancies.
Okay, the question I have written down here is around corporate taxes and where you see those going up. But I think from the earlier part of the discussion that we had, I was saying there is, the need for infrastructure. There is some pressure. I think Minister Anand has been tasked with saying, can you carve out $15 billion out of the current year? And which amounts to, it's not much in the grand scheme of what the budget is. But we come back to what investments do you need to make for all the other challenges that we're facing. Corporate taxes is, I guess, from a government perspective, potentially, if you're going to pick an enemy, why not make it allegedly big business? The problem is that it's small business too. If you start looking at corporate taxes, do you anticipate that? I mean, if there is I guess this is maybe the question. Increased revenues may be required to fund what we need to do, and you've made the case, whether it's hospitals, infrastructure, transit. Is that the place they're going to go, or is there something else? Like, I mean, should we be looking at, increasing the GST as an example, or HST? I mean, if there's more required in order to make the investments that we need, not to be short-sighted about the investments that the economy and communities need, what does that look like to you?
Listen, like by far the most effective tax in the country is the GST. Like it's the least distortionary. Now everybody hates paying it, but from an economic perspective, that's the most efficient tax. Now, are taxes likely to go up? I don't know. We've got be next election campaign in a couple of years, kind of already started. It's difficult to see a government campaigning on, we're going to raise your taxes, whether small businesses, GST, big businesses, personal income tax. I don't see it. They may do it at the end of the day, but I can't see them kind of announcing that. The flip side of that is if they don't, and they want to do some of these investments, they're going to find savings somewhere else. And that's where things get really difficult. It's not a matter of firing a couple 100,000 public servants. It's all of a sudden you're going to be able to fund, all the things that we need to fund in this country. You need to cut programs back, right? So like, do you want to do childcare? Do you want to do pharmacare? Do you want to cut back on old age benefits? Do you want to cut back on transfers to provinces? Like those are the big ticket items that if you're unwilling to touch those and you want to do all this other stuff, it pretty well guarantees that you're either going to have to raise taxes or run big deficits. And I would bet on the deficit side. Parties might say, we're not, vote for us. Conservatives, I wouldn't be surprised, say vote for us. We're going to get the deficit under control. It's going to be challenging for them to do that without cutting back on things that Canadians now value. That may change in a couple of years, but so.
Okay. Well, I got the 3-minute warning, so I'm last question. When we're together in 12 months and doing this again, see how I did that, Scotia folks, JF, when he's back here in 12 months, what would be, looking back on this next 12 months, what would be your headline with a first paragraph?
What I very much hope in 12 months is that interest rates are lower than where they are now. And that we're coming into this conversation with, how fast and how much our rates are going to go down, and how much is economic activity going to rebound as a result. That I think, it's not a Goldilocks scenario. That's actually a forecast. And we're very much hoping that's right.
Okay, well, we're going to hold you to that, and we're going to keep the tape on that part here as you come back here. Listen, thank you. We are out of time. I'm going to invite Scott. We'll just stay here. We could just quickly wrapping up. But thank you for spending time with us today and visiting Waterloo Region and sharing your time with University of Waterloo and other areas here at Waterloo Region. Appreciate you taking the time. Always enjoy having these conversations. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you once again to Jean-Francois. Thanks, Ian, for participating in our fireside chat with no fire. And thank you very much to Scotiabank for continued support. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our staff for organizing the event, and also the sponsors of today's event. Our volunteer appreciation sponsor, Cowan Insurance Group, our speaker sponsor, Scotiabank, our hosts, Maxwell's Concerts and Events, and our hospitality partner, Little Mushroom Catering. Thank you. And finally, thank you again for everyone attending today's event, whether you're watching remotely or attending live with us today. For those here in person, we're not done yet. We're going to have a little bit of networking, drinks and appetizers, which are now available. If you're virtual and not too far away, you're welcome to drive over and get some drinks and apps as well. So following the reception, we would really appreciate your feedback. There is an iPad on your way out if you can submit a rating for the event, and feel free to talk to any of the staff or board members if you have feedback on the event. Thank you and have a great evening.
That was awesome.